Alright guys, hey, thanks for coming back and watching this video. Hey, last time we were talking, or I was talking, so weird, but I feel like I'm talking to you guys directly. We were talking about surfing and where surfing took me in my life and how I got started in it. And one of the things is after I gave my life to the Lord, God had kind of sent me out on a mission and said, listen, you're going to go out and reach the people that were like you, the drug addicts, the fighters, the kids that were abused, and basically street kids. And I spent the last 30 years of my life, 35 years of my life in ministry and really focusing. And basically what happened was I just started going down to the beach. I started going down to the beach and just sitting there. Didn't matter if it was raining, just show up, meet the people, hang out. I originally started in Huntington, and because that's where I surfed. And over the years, basically what would happen is God would shift me. I ended up in San Clemente. Huntington Beach was my home. It was where I learned to surf. It was where I learned to deal with life, and I still to this day, it's a special place in my heart. It's changed a lot. It's built up a lot. A lot of the old shacks that were there are no longer there. But life changes. It's just like life. Life changes. But I would end up in San Clemente, and with my family, my wife and I would move down there. Basically what drove us down there was I had my first plumbing company, and I bought my boss out, and a couple of really crazy things. Some of you guys will believe this, some of you won't. But, and again, I'm not going to use any names, don't know these people anymore. I know a lot of them are dead. But when I first became a Christian, I had to get out of my job because I was a dealer. I was selling dope, I was doing meth, I was traveling all over, and it wasn't a good environment for me. So I got out of the asphalt business and I left the company I'd been working for and running business through and stuff. And I got out of that scene, left my job for $23 an hour at 17 years old, 18 years old. And I went to work at this guy that my now father-in-law, one of his friends, had a plumbing company. And he had just bought it not too long before, and he didn't really want to work it too much, but he was looking for guys to help, so I needed work. So my father-in-law said, hey, this guy needs somebody to dig a trench. It's $4 an hour. And I said, yeah, I'll take it, whatever. So I dug a trench, ended up working for the guy for 4 years. As time went on, what would happen is I would realize that plumbing was an opportunity for me to be able to get into the doors that other people couldn't get in. So I would catch myself praying with people, praying for marriages, praying for their kids, praying for healing in their lives. And it became something that I really enjoyed doing. And it wasn't the work, but it was the ministry part of being able to talk to people. And the work just paid the bills. But I would end up basically buying that company from my boss. But one of the deals was I had to finish this job. And we had been working on this factory for almost a year. And he said, well, we buy the business out, you get everything, blah, blah, blah. And he said, but the condition is you got to finish this one last job. And I had been managing this job the whole time, so I knew the people. We'd sit down, it's a Sicilian family, and we would sit down, and the father didn't speak very good English, so the son would translate. We'd sit there every morning and have espresso, like real espresso, in a little cup about that big. And we'd sit there and we'd have our coffee and everything, and we would talk about the progress with the job. And at the end of the job, I've been doing this for a year with these people, super cool people, and anybody that knows about Sicily knows that there's big houses and little houses there, and I'll just leave it at that. But basically what ended up happening, it was really weird. and again, I got a flashback later to something, but I'm going to share this with you guys now. So I'm probably 23, 24 years old at this point. I'm married to Tiffany. We're literally in our first year of marriage, I believe. And I bought this business from him, and I'm finishing up this job, and the guy says, hey, at the end of the job, we sit down. He says, hey, I want to invite you and your wife over for dinner. And I'm like, I don't know, my wife's not really into going and hanging out with my customers too much and stuff. But I go over to this guy's house. He wants to give me my final check for the job. It's not my money. It's the guy I bought the business from's money. Wants to give me my final check and wants to talk to me. So I'm like, okay, cool. And thinking other jobs, maybe he's got more work for us. And I go over to his house, and you walk in, and I mean, it's literally this huge mansion, huge white marble mansion, and white pillars. And as you're driving up the driveway, it's about a half-a-mile driveway into the mountains, the foothills. And he lived up in Upland. And as I'm driving up this road, you come in the gate, and there's Andalusians. And I don't know what the white version of an Andalusian is, but there's a black Andalusian on one side. And then on the other side, there's these two white ones. They look like white Andalusians, but I don't know if that's possible. But they're just running next to me. It's like a surreal moment. And I'm just like, what the heck? It's like a fairyland. And I'm driving up this driveway, and I get up to the guy's house, and it's just this huge mansion. There's dudes standing outside in suits by the door and everything. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I go in, introduce myself to the guys. They walk me in, and there's my customers standing there, and this guy was funny, man. All this money, all this stuff he had, and he would wear these train engineer overalls. He wore these, I mean, not to offend anybody, but the only time I've ever really seen him was during the Holocaust stuff, the black leather shoes. So it was like a black leather shoe, but very poorly made, looked like it was poorly made. The soles were made out of leather. He would wear those, and he would wear this engineer hat. And so he comes out, doesn't speak English. Son's translating. He's at home, and he's wearing the same thing that he wore to work every day for a year that I saw him. And I'm like, man, what is up with this guy and his clothes? You would expect him to come out in a white suit at this point with a big old white furry hat or something, looking at his house. And I go down, we sit down, we're waiting for dinner and everything, and he says, Joe, the son is translating for me, and he says, hey, my dad would like to invite you. He wanted to say thank you for all the work and everything. You did a great job, and he would like to invite you and your wife to Sicily to visit for a month. And he's going to pay all expenses paid. You don't have to do anything. You just need to say yes. And I was like, and at that time, you had all the mafia stuff going on, and everybody and all the different mob families running around, and every kid my age that wasn't a sports star or an astronaut wanted to be a mobster. And, I'm a Christian at this point, but he's talking to me. He says, wants to take me to Sicily and my wife. And I was just like, man, I just got married, just took over my first company. And now all of a sudden I got this guy inviting me to Sicily for a month. And I told him, I said, well, and I kind of looked at him and I smiled and I said, well, there's only two kinds of houses in Sicily. And I go, there's big houses and little houses. And I just said, what kind of house do you have? And he laughed. This big, deep, and he threw his head back, and he thought it was a hilarious question. And he just starts laughing and laughing and laughing, and he finally stops, and he looks over at his son, and he says something in Italian, and his son looks at me and says, my dad wants you to know that he has a very big house. And I just said, okay, well, I'm honored that you would invite me to your house, but I can't, that's not going to happen. And I don't share this, now I'm sharing it with the world, but it is what it is. But I don't share it with a lot of people because it's a really awkward deal for me. But now I don't know my biological family at this point. I only know my step parents. And what ends up happening is I said, well, I won't be joining you in Sicily. I go, I'm honored, thank you for the invite, but no. And he starts crying. Italian tears, Sicilian tears, mourning, like those mourning kind of tears. And he just sits there and cries for like 5 minutes. And I was like, listen, man, I'm sorry if I offended your father. And he goes, no. He goes, you're okay, you're good. It's not that. And he catches his breath and he looks at me and he says, your grandfather is going to be very disappointed. And I'm like, I'm 23 years old. My grandpa died when I was maybe 6 to 8 years old. I was at his funeral. I saw him in his coffin. I'm thinking, the guy that raised me, I don't know my biological family. And I go, well, my grandfather's dead. And he goes, no, your grandfather's very alive. And he lives in Sicily. And he wants me to, he asked me to invite you to Sicily because he'd like to meet you. And I was like, here I am, I'm adopted, been abused my whole life, been through all kinds of hell. I'm an adult now, I'm a Christian, I'm living my life, I'm happy. Now all of a sudden this dude's like, yeah, man, I know your grandpa. And I told him, I said, well, unfortunately, I can't join you in Sicily. And I go, if my grandfather wants to meet me, he's gonna have to come here. And I'd be happy to talk to him. And he looked at me and he said, your grandfather's not welcome in your country. And he didn't say he was mob, he didn't say why, he didn't say what was going on. I don't know the story at this point. And it was kind of mind blowing. And I was like, it didn't click. I was kind of in shock and it didn't all click. I'd worked for this guy for a year. My boss gave up a 55-year-old plumbing company and sold it to me and bailed. And I didn't understand what was going on. It didn't click. It didn't all, calculate in my head what was really the big picture of this. So I go home, tell my wife, it was weird, they invited us to Sicily. I told them no, and didn't really think anything of it for like 10 years. Fast forwarding 10 years down the road, my mom, biological mother, I've reconnected with at this point, and she decides that she's going to take my wife and I to Buckeye, Arizona. And apparently, I didn't know why we were going on this trip. She just said, hey, listen, I want you guys to come to Arizona with me. We lived in Arizona when we were kids, so I knew she had family there. And we get on the drive. My daughter was just born. So we take my Jeep Grand Cherokee or whatever we had at the time, and we drive across the desert. We get to Arizona from California, and we pull into Buckeye. And Buckeye, when I was a kid, was just a desolate cotton fields, and there was a Greyhound track there and stuff, but was nothing big. But we pull into Buckeye and we come up to this house, and we pull up to this house. There's a black Lincoln Continental in the driveway, and all of a sudden, this tiny old lady comes walking out with the walker, and then an older lady than her. And I looked at my mom. I go, Mom, what's going on? And I go, who is this? And she goes, it's your grandma. Well, I'm thinking her mom, and I'm like, she goes, it's your grandmother. I go, Mom, Grandma died. Like, dude, are you losing your mind? And she goes, no, this is your dad's mom, your biological grandmother. And then all of a sudden my heart drops, like, dude, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this. I don't know if these people care about me. And all these emotions start going through my mind. And Tiffany's just sitting there like, dude, I don't know, man, this is weird, and kind of doing her thing. And I go up and I introduce myself, and they're crying, and it's all emotional and everything. And we go inside, and a few minutes into the conversation, I go down and I kissed this lady that had had a stroke. I didn't know who she was. And she was introduced as my aunt. But I go down and I give her a kiss. And when I come up, she slaps me. And I was kind of like, you know, old lady, probably in her 80s, turns around, right hooks me. She slaps me, and then she starts telling me that, you know, you could have had everything if you would have came and found us. You would have had everything. You're the firstborn grandson, and this and that. She starts going off on me, and I'm like, lady, listen, I know nothing about you. I don't even know who you are. And I'm really confused, man, because here I am. I'm in my 20s. I'm trying to figure out my life. I've gotten over the fact that I was adopted. I got over the fact that I never met my parents, my dad. And all of a sudden, these people are coming into my life. And we sit down, and so I kind of settled down a little bit. And she basically told me I was supposed to inherit 144 mortuaries from Chicago to Florida. And she went on to tell me that, you know, the family was in the mob or whatever at the time, and don't know what family. You know, I don't go by that name. I don't even know the real name. So there's no story really there as far as that goes. I just know that she told me that I was supposed to inherit the mafia, that I was the first in line for the mob. And I didn't know what that meant. You know, I didn't care what that meant. It kind of freaked me out a little bit. And then she goes in, and my grandmother goes in her room and she grabs a photo album. And she has an album, and she starts flipping through the pages. Now, these people I've never met ever in my life that I know of. But when I was a kid, my brother and I would be walking home from school or riding our bikes, and every once in a while we thought the cops were following us because these dudes in suits would kind of follow us, and we'd always ditch them. But never really thought anything of it. You know, we knew our dad was, my stepdad was kind of, some of his friends were shady. I didn't know what was going on. But what would end up happening is she would explain to me about the mafia connection in my life. And, you know, I looked at my mom and I was like, dude, why don't I know any of this? And she's like, honey, I didn't want you to be part of this. It wasn't what I wanted for you. So I took you from this family and this and that. So I was like, okay, whatever. Apparently my dad never really came looking for me. So we didn't know much about each other. I was a love child. And so my grandma goes and gets this album. And as I'm looking through it, I'm realizing that the guys that were following me my whole life, from the time I was 2 until present day, my grandma had pictures of me a couple times a year playing in a park or walking home from school with my brother. And my friend that I talked about that was going to commit suicide, he was in one of them. And I'm like, what the heck? And I'm looking and I'm like, you've known where I was my whole life? And my grandma goes, yeah, we've been watching you your whole life. And you guys, at that point in my life, I had such a bitterness towards her and towards her family. And I always wondered if they cared about me. I always wondered if they loved me or even knew that I was there or what. You know, I didn't know what kind of people these people were. And there was a point in high school where my brother had said, listen, man, if you want to go find your dad, I'll take you. Like, we'll go. Let's go look for him. We know he lives in Arizona. We were told he lived in Arizona. And he was like, dude, we'll go. And we set it up and we were ready to go. And I chickened out. I was like, dude, I don't want to know the guy. Like, I'm good. And now here I am years later, and I'm meeting my grandmother and my great-grandmother and a couple of my aunts, and I'm just confused, man. I'm like, who are you people? Like, why? You knew me, you knew my whole life, you knew where I was my whole life, but you never came and got me. I don't understand that. If you cared about me. And my grandma said, well, that's not the way we do it. And I was like, I couldn't imagine, like, it just didn't click. But we went on and we had a great day, and I got to meet her, and I was honored. She hooked me up with my sister shortly after that had no idea that I was alive. My younger sister, and we became, still to this day, we're super close, and I love her, and I care about my family and my niece, and just the people in my life on that side are so special to me. But there's distance, so we're not super overwhelmingly close. We don't go out to dinner every night, but you know, I love them. They know that I love them. I know that they love me. And there was a big healing there. years later. But I went home kind of confused, man, and I didn't know what to think about it. And then all of a sudden, it clicked. Years before, when that Sicilian guy said he knew my grandfather, and then I started putting things together, and I thought, man, did my boss sell me my business because they told him to? Did they set that up? Because why did that dude want me to go to Sicily? And then here I am years later meeting my grandmother that's telling me my grandpa hasn't been he's been in Sicily pretty much for the last 20 years or whatever it was. And it all started coming together, and I started getting more hurt and more animosity towards my family. And here I'm in my 20s at this point in my life, and I would go on later on, I wouldn't meet my dad, my biological dad. I wouldn't communicate with him. I communicated with my sister for 20, 25 years, texting, phone, whatever, throughout the years, but I never really communicated with my dad. I never reached out. And every Father's Day I would send a text, I'd get a text. And every Father's Day my sister would go, dude, send it, just hit the button, send. And I never sent it. And I was so scared of the response he would give me. And I knew that he was a good father to her. I knew that he was a good grandpa to my niece. I just didn't know how he was going to react to me. And I was scared. I was scared of the response. So I was 50 years old, 4 years ago. I finally sent the text. My sister called me on Father's Day to wish me happy Father's Day. And she said, would you please send it? Just send it. And I ended up sending the text. And I just said, hey man, this is me. I'm supposed to be your son. You know, this is my mom. I'm not looking for a father. I'm not looking for a daddy, but I'd like to know you. I'd like to know a little bit about you. I have a son, and I'd like to know what to tell him our heritage is. And not 2 minutes later, I get a text that says, I love you. We can talk whenever you're ready. And I just sat on my couch and cried. My kids came in, they're like, Dad, what's up? And I'm just like, just read this. I can't talk, you know. And that hit me in such a way because my whole life I wondered if they hated me, loved me, cared about me. I didn't know the truth, you know, and I was afraid of the truth, so I never researched it and I never pushed it. But at that point in my life, I got that healing, and God restored that in my life. And, you know, it was one of those things that going back to the surfing stuff in the beginning, when we first started our ministry and I started going out and talking to these kids, they'd be like, well, what do you know? You know, you have a white picket fence, you have a perfect family, you have a business, you're successful. And I just smile. I go, man, I'm a high school dropout. I was a drug dealer. I was a high school dropout. I tried to commit suicide 6 times. You know, I can relate. In the facade that we carry in our daily walk, I was really good because when I gave up my old life, I gave it up because I told God, if I ever walk away from you, I'll never come back. And I knew, because the kind of person I am, that if I walked away from God and I backslid, like my friends, the drug dealer guys told me, you know, if you ever come back, I'll kill you. But I wasn't afraid of that. What I was afraid of was I knew that if I ever got distant from God, if I ever backslid, if I ever walked away, I was never coming back, because I was so in love with God and I was so in healed and so mended and so happy with my life that I knew that if anything could get me away from that, it would be so powerful that I couldn't overcome it. And there was a lot of times in my life, and you guys will hear about it, where those stories hit me, man, and surfing was my thing. Surfing was my escape. Surfing was my prayer closet. Surfing was, it's what I did, surfing and skating. Surfing, both my kids surfed and skated. You know, it's one of those things that as time goes on, you realize that God orchestrates things in our lives, and we're allowed to go through pain and suffering. Okay, I didn't understand why God did that with my dad, my mom, and that wasn't about me, that was about them and where they were in their lives. But I wouldn't find out the truth about my adoption or what my mom said, my biological mom said the truth was. I only knew my step-parents' side. But on the day that I got married, my mom would share with me what really happened, what she believed really happened. And it was a completely different story. It was like getting slapped in the face again in my life. And you know, there's certain times where I felt like, man, my life's going so good, everything's so great, the ministry's flourishing, my family's flourishing, my wife and I are happy, we're making money. And then you get punched in the face by something, and it just devastates you. And that's happened systematically in my life in the past. Has happened every 3 or 4 years for me. It's almost like a cycle, man, and I don't understand it. I just know that God keeps moving things and shuffling things in my life. But I want to encourage you guys, you know, if you're feeling the pain, if you don't know your parents, if you're feeling rejected, the only thing that's for sure that I can tell you is God's never forsaken me, man, and he's always helped me through stuff. And even when I think he's not there, he's there. You know, in the last video, I talked about how he reached his hand down and touched me when I was at the darkest point, you know, that I had been at, and I was ready to leave and never come back, and never come back to my belief in Christ. And I felt like he abandoned me, and at that moment, he proved to me that he was real. So I would encourage you guys, man, don't give up on things. Stick with me. Hear the stories. I hope it's encouraging to you guys, but these are just little things that kind of they qualify me to be here and to share and to love on you guys. And you know, I'm hoping someday I'll be doing this from a pulpit. I don't want to be a pastor. It's not what I'm called to do. But you know, my goal with this is I want to fill stadiums with people, and I want to be able to share this with people and encourage people and love on people. And I don't care if they're Christian or not. Hopefully we can help them get there. But this message that I'm sending out, the book I'm sending out, it isn't about, it's only my story. It's only my example of how God worked in my life. And everybody's different. Everybody has a different story. And excuse me. And I want to encourage you guys, you know, if you're being hurt, you're being drawn, you're being distant, things are going on in your life, just lean on God, and man, it works. You know, it's worked in my life for years and years now, and it continues to work in my life, and I continue to battle with it every day. But the healing that came with meeting my grandmother, the healing that came with meeting my dad and him saying, I love you, that changed everything, and that was 50 years old. It's not too late, you know, and it can happen. I mean, I'm a story of it, you know, and I'm writing a book because of it. But, you know, I just want to encourage you guys, and you know, if you want to subscribe. If you want to write me something, write me something. Like I always say, this is my heart, and I'll do my best to respond to you. If I can help in any way, I'll help. I know this world of YouTube and everything is so massive, but you know, I don't care if you're on the other side of the world. I'll do my best to figure out what you're saying to me, and I'll try to get back to you. And you know, this is something that I feel like if it helps one person like me when I was a kid, then it's worth it. It's worth my time. It's worth the effort. It's worth the money to invest. So if I can help you guys, great. I hope this video helps you. Hope you guys have a great day. And in the next video, we're gonna go back to my past and really start diving into how the ministry started in the first couple of years of just heavy spiritual attack and spiritual things. I had guns pulled on me. I had death threats against my family. I changed the drug world in the town that I lived in. I dealt with a lot of extremely wealthy kids in San Clemente. Parents are all millionaires, and these kids were dealing drugs and running and in gangs and everything. whole different dynamic than somebody that lives in a ghetto, because you don't think they're going to have those issues. But the problem is they're being raised by their nannies. They don't know their parents. They're trying to get their parents' attention, but their parents are pushing to make a future for their families, and they're pushing for that money to be able to provide. So they think they're helping their kids by providing. And in the long term, what's happening is the kids are being raised by a housekeeper or a nanny, and they don't even know their parents, and they're hurt, and they're trying to get their parents' attention by acting up. And I deal with a lot of that. And in the next couple of chapters of this thing, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the kids that changed their lives. That when I first met them, it was pretty sketchy, but how God had gone in and used me to change their lives and to get them out of those scenes and to be able to recuperate their lifestyles. And again, if you guys, if I've touched you, let me know. If you're reading this or watching it on YouTube, I'd love to know if you're somebody from my past that I've helped. I'd love to hear the story. I'd like to know if one of these stories is you, because I don't get to talk to a lot of the kids that I've seen over the thousands of people that I've seen over the years and been able to help. I don't get to talk to them much. I don't get in contact because I move a lot. So if it's one of you and you happen to see me, I'd love to hear from you guys, man. Hope it encourages you, and we'll talk to you later.